Hola, Vivi.
Hola Pablo, ¿me escuchas bien?
Sí, sí te escucho.
Listo. Ahí ya están entrando varios. Estoy aceptándolos. ¿Siguen sin salirte?
Ya los veo. Y ya está llegando Dov también.
Sí.
¿Pones a grabar, por favor?
Listo, grabando.
Listo. Hello, Dov. Can you hear me? Gracias, Andrea. Hi, Dov. Can you hear me? I can see you, but you're on mute.
Sorry.
Better.
Good.
Nice to hear you. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation for this talk today. Let me introduce you and wait for a second for some people to arrive and we'll start. So again, we are fortunate to have you here. As you saw, we work in several topics, including serious games. Our lab is a collaboration between mechanical, electrical, and we call it systems and computer engineers, which is something related to computer science, but with a different title here in Latin America. But well, that's what we are. And eventually it will be nice to have you here in Bogota and show you the lab, as I told you. For the moment, I think we have a nice crowd that want to hear you and not listen to me. So let me introduce you again, and for sure you introduce yourself in your talk. But this is Dov Jacobson. We are fortunate to have him here and talking a little bit on his experience on serious games. And I'm pretty sure he can do a better job than me introducing himself. So I'll just give you rights to present, and you can share your presentation and whatever you want to say to us. Vivian, ¿me ayudas con esos permisos, por favor? So thank you again, Dov, and let's start with your talk.
I still don't have permission to share.
Oh, let me, yeah, it's done.
Okay, good. Is that working?
Yes, I can see the presentation. Thank you.
Great. So, yeah, I'm really pleased the public gave me the opportunity to talk to you. I hope that the material I'm doing is relevant and that my people have trouble understanding me that speak in native English. I will try to speak as clearly as I can. Thank you for letting me speak in English. So I've been involved in games and game-based learning for a very, very long time. In fact, I guess you should know my background a little bit, so you know where I'm coming from. I did not study game making in school, but I had a reason for that. When I went to school, this is where computer graphics was. Everything was on paper. They had not yet invented the screen, glass. Everything was paper. So nothing was interactive. And I loved making pictures. I loved trying to get this paper technology to do something beyond just sit there. And I would print out patterns and then video them or film them with film. And we could do some very, very, very crude things. But that's that wasn't a place to learn about games. Uh, this is my graduate school. This is where I learned about games. But mind you, at this point, I was in my late 20s. I wasn't this kid. I wasn't this 14-year-old kid. I was on the other side of the screen. My job was to get this kid, this, well, typically young player, to reach into his pocket and put more quarters into the game. My job was to beat him and have the game beat him so he would get off it, but beat him so teasingly that he would be convinced if he put another quarter in, he would do better. And this was a great education, and I was paid, basically on how well I was able to keep people losing and wanting to keep losing and getting something out of it. Of course, every time they had to do a little bit better. So this was my the education that I'm still using now is how to motivate people to want to learn something. Here in my games, they would learn things like how to go into a castle and kill all the zombies and get to the nuclear reactor before it explodes. These are not life, real life skills that are very useful, but they're fun. And uh, later I began to look at if we're going to teach them to learn, they might learn something more useful than killing zombies. Um, so I went from kind of experimental games to and small companies. Eventually, I was able to run a mid-sized studio, but actually a pretty decent-sized studio, and we delivered a lot of entertainment games. And it was great because the studio had a lot of money and had a lot of assets, and we made games that were popular in the around the beginning of the millennium and in the 90s, like Dinotopia and Gettysburg, games that were popular before you were born, probably. And then um, after that, I decided to run my own studio. And I looked around and for a while we made entertainment games like everyone else. But I was looking for a niche, a kind of a game that I would feel really good about making and that there was a market that was not as crowded as the entertainment game studio market. A place where people would pay for games to be made. And that was games about learning. People who needed to learn something, that game would have value. People who wanted to teach something. And our first customers, I didn't put these in the right. No, first we did entertainment games, but then when we tried to do games where people would learn, most companies were and still are frightened by games, but the military was not. And we did a number of games for the military. Their games, military's been using games for hundred thousands, chess. Well, a lot of games grew out of military exercises. So they trusted games. We didn't make games about warfare because that's a specialty. We made games about understanding other people, games about leadership, games about cross-cultural communication, only because when we entered it, that's the field that was open, where there weren't players already. But we also wanted to do games that were more civilian oriented. We did games with research after the military was open to it, then the research organizations and museums and a little bit and schools, some schools, not public schools, but some private schools with radical education systems would be willing to be excited about making games. So we made games about um, learning to do business, games about feeling good about um, the kids in your class who are in a wheelchair, how to feel about them, how to respect them. Games about science. I'll show you some, but really, instead of going over those games, what I think I'd like to do is show you really kind of what principles we've learned. One thing I learned is that that games are really expensive to make and hard to make compared to other ways of learning. So you really need to be teaching something that only a game can teach. And those things exist. And I've been breaking down the subject, the learning objective, into 5 different quadrants. And the way I've been doing that is, first of all, to consider thinking. A lot of thinking is hard work, and thinking takes time. And often we're teaching people how to think. But sometimes you want to learn to do things without thinking, because thinking takes time, and you don't have time. For example, most sports are not about thinking or dancing. If you're thinking, you're probably going to screw up. So we can divide learning into thinking and non-thinking activities. And if you ever have a chance to read Daniel Kahneman, he did a great deal of work on understanding the difference between when you're taking action, you're making decisions based on shortcuts, and when you're making decisions based on thinking it through. And the problem is that you often use the shortcuts when you should think through. And he named those really brilliantly, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is I don't think about it. I just instantly react. And a lot of that's bad. I react to someone who's poor as if they're going to rob me. I don't, but I might, if I think about things, I might come to a much more, different conclusion and save a lot of errors. Another way to look at things are how much activity is involved. The thing that I'm trying to teach somebody to do they have to think or do they have to not think? Do they have to do, this woman's listening to music, and these women are listening to music. But one activity is passive and one is active. So here are my 4 quadrants. Doing and thinking. So we'll divide the world into thinking going vertically and doing going horizontally. If you're thinking about something, if we want to train somebody to think, but not to do anything, we're trying to teach them an attitude. For example, those children that were in classes with other children in wheelchairs, our game was to teach an attitude that the kids in the wheelchair are powerful and deserve respect, and well, that they deserve respect mostly. So that doesn't require thinking. We don't want them to think about it. We want them to feel it. And we don't want them to do anything. We just want them to have that attitude. Or our client did. If you're thinking but you're not doing anything, then you're acquiring knowledge. And knowledge, like for example, when we did a science game, we wanted to teach about quantum mechanics, about the way that electrons worked. We didn't want people to do anything. We wanted them to understand these things. If you're doing something but you're not thinking, that's a habit. And habits can be they're dumb, you don't think about it, but they're very valuable to acquire. If your child develops the habit of brushing his teeth, that's very valuable to the child and to you. So we made it a game, we've taught 300,000 children to brush their teeth. Skill, in a toothbrushing game, skill was involved, but skill was not the important thing. The habit was the important thing. But for example, in the surgery game, we might be teaching someone, a skill. So they have to think about what they're doing, and they have to actually do something. So these different models of thinking, of activity, of learning, the things that you might learning objectives, these 4 different areas of learning objectives, have 4 different ways to teach them. Here's an example. If you have to look at your problem that you want. People come to us and they say, we want our nurses to wash their hands. Oh, what does that mean? Do you want them to have an attitude? They should feel that if their hands aren't clean, they're uncomfortable. We can do that. Do we want to teach them why they should wash their hands? What kind of bacteria are going to cause what kind of problems? And then they'll know about it and they'll do it. Maybe. Do we want to teach them exactly the right procedure for washing your hands perfectly? How many seconds to scrub? How to wash between the different fingers? But that might be important too. Or do you want to just teach them that when they walk into the exam room, they just wash their hands without thinking? And all these are possible, but it's really important to figure out which is the skill you're trying to really teach, what you want people to do. If people know to wash their hands, but they don't do a good job, well, then we better teach the skill. If people don't believe it's important, well, maybe we should explain that. But usually, we just want them to develop that habit. But you learn, what we found is really valuable is not only talking to the client, but going to people and watching them and seeing how they're doing and what they're doing wrong and trying to figure that out. So I'm going to say different parts of the game teach different things. For stories, we can listen to things, and that's a really good way to pick up an attitude, by listening to stories. That's why politicians don't show slides and ministers don't show slides, rarely. They mostly talk because we listen and we can develop an attitude. But if we want somebody to understand something complicated, we better put a slide up. We have to be looking. So the visuals, the knowledge is going to come visually. If we want somebody to learn a skill, they have to practice it. We have to give them a way to actually do it. If we want them to learn a habit, then we need to reward them. Reward them for doing it, not for doing it well, but just for doing it. Gamification is a term that we use that our clients use a lot, and it's different than a game. When they say gamification, they mean a reward system for behavior. For example, I'm going to go to the McDonald's and buy a hamburger and win a little token, and if I put the tokens together, I can win a prize. That's gamification. I'm not playing a serious game or any kind of game. I'm just collecting things by performance. And it has a place, but it isn't a game. A game is different. A game is outside of these 4 quadrants. Because we talked about skill and attitude and knowledge and habit. But there's something much more important for human performance in any of those. And that's putting it all together. That's solving problems that the person who's teaching you were never taught to solve. It's knowing which of these knowledges and skills, which one to use at any one time. So I call that mastery, and that's that you learn that only by solving problems. That's the fifth quadrant, is mastery. And really, if you think about it, most of the time, you don't want people to learn knowledge. You can pick up all the knowledge you want on the internet. And attitude is often in your way. Oh, attitude is nice, but really you want people to be able to solve new problems. And that's where a game can do, that's what only a game can teach. All the other stuff you can teach other ways, but a real game where people are asked to solve a problem in the game that's similar to the kind of problem that they're going to solve in real life. That's the magic. And that's where you get mastery. So those are my 5 quadrants. Learning by looking, learning by listening, learning by doing, learning by grinding, or learning by solving. And learning by solving, that's where I've spent most of my time. And it works. It works. This is a game that we did for the CIA. They wanted a game because their analysts were making a lot of mistakes. When the CIA or any intelligence agency makes a mistake, the consequences are horrible. Right? People can die. Countries can be invaded. It's bad news when they make a mistake. So, and they noticed that they were making mistakes, and they understood why. They just couldn't get the people to stop doing the behavior, the analytic behavior that caused the mistake. So they hired, actually, to tell you the truth, they hired 5 different game companies, and we all competed to see who could do this the best. And the budgets were spectacular. And this is our game. And you can see, can I do this? Here, this is where we started out. The yellow, our students, our players went from 60 to 80 something in knowledge. They understood the problem better. They gained knowledge. But you know what? The people playing the control, and the control is a really, really good video that taught the same material. And you know what? The control were even better. It was watching a funny video with people explaining the problem. You could learn the facts better. And our players worked it a little harder, so they remembered longer. This third set of bars is 2 months later. Do they remember? And people forget. They forget a little bit less in the game, so that's good, because you really you don't want people to learn, you want them to remember what they've learned. But that's mildly interesting. This is the part that was super interesting. This was, the testing on this cost as much as the game making. They had extremely good psychologists conducting the tests and inventing the tests. So they not only tested what you learned, they tested how you now behave. Did it change the way you actually performed your job? And it did. It did with the control and it did with the game, but the game did better. But most importantly, 2 months later, the people who learned from the video were starting to go back into their old habits. The people who learned from the game actually did even better in 2 months, because they were used to, and as far as I can understand it, and it wasn't only our game. Every game, all 5 of the games showed this. That people would continue. Their behavior measures would continue to grow, And I think that's because they played in the game the same things that they did in real life, and then in real life they continued the game and continued to learn. And I think a little bit of it is the way that a game teaches. You know, in school, you're taught, then you perform an exercise, and then you're tested. Where is this? You know what? My slide disappeared. Doesn't matter. Okay. In a serious game, you're going to learn by playing. You're going to start here with in the beginning of time, knowing nothing, and you'll play, and at the end, you'll have learned something while you played. Okay. And now, if there's no failure in the game, it's pretty simple. It's very much like regular, school. I'm instructed in something, then I watch an example of it being done properly, usually, or I do something that's a really easy version of it, a tutorial version. And then I have a test. And if I succeed, maybe I get some congratulations or explanation of why I did well. And now I've learned. Maybe. And the hypothesis is all game developers, serious game developers, assume that, yeah, you learn by that exercise, but you learn a lot better if you fail. Because if you failed, you tried something, and now you have to figure out why it worked, or why it didn't work, and make it work. And so instead of just getting here, you're going to get the extra knowledge, the extra insight from failing and working it out. I imagine that you guys would agree with me on that. But it's like this guy, right? He screwed up. He put another quarter in. He didn't screw up as bad. And he put another quarter in, and he got a little better. But it's not true. It's not. It's true in a video arcade because the video arcade has a selected group of people that want to do that. But a learning game has to work for everybody. So we'll see. Yeah, some learners are going to do better, but some people do worse. And this isn't me talking. This is, the literature talking. If you go and read up, which I did, you'll see plenty of examples of how failure. You don't have to go to the literature to read this. You know it's true because you've gone to a party, and at the party, someone recognized you and said, hello, Leonardo. And you said, I'm sorry, I'm not good with names. Right? You couldn't remember the name, and you said you're not good with names. And you believed it too. It's not just that you're using it as an excuse, you use it inside. You were tested and you failed, and what you learned is, I suck at this. People, that's what math is like for a lot of people. I'm introduced to math, I get it wrong, well, I'm not a math person. Maybe. So that is a condition called learned helplessness. I've learned that I can't do it. It's a really terrible thing. What we want is what they call the mastery response. I've learned that I didn't do it right, and now I learned how to do it right. I acquired new abilities, and I also feel better about myself, and legitimately. But if our game is doing this, is crushing people, we're we're part of the problem. We're a big part of the problem if we're doing that. And it's not hard to do. It's easy to do. And you can't say, well, those people shouldn't be playing my game. Well, you kind of can. So here's how you can. You can say there's two kinds of people in the world. There's that kid with the video game. He's a learner. He learns from failure. And then there's the losers. They lose and they say, I'm helpless. I'm not good. So you're born either a learner or a loser. Okay, if that's the way you look at the world, if that's the way you look at your players, there's that learner. There's things you can do in the game. One thing that is done sometimes, and we've done, is that we'll put some sort of a little test in the early part of the game to see how people respond to failure. It's something that's inconsequential. It doesn't affect the gameplay. It doesn't affect the whole game. But we use it to say, oh, this guy, he's not going to be able to handle failure. So we're not going to let him ever fail. We're not going to give him a test that he can do wrong on. And the other guys, they'll come through this green path and they'll get to the end and they'll get the value of this. And we're not going to crush this guy, but we're not going to be able to help him either. But at least we won't crush him. Okay. Another thing that we can do is we can say, woo, we caught that guy. We caught the one that started to feel like they were helpless. And we don't let them fail. And we pull them up. We unlearn their helplessness. And that's great. If we can do that, that's great. It's not easy. It's not easy to say, oh, it's hard to do in real life when you're standing next to somebody, looking them in the eye to help them feel better about their failure and to encourage them to move forward. This is a game. We don't actually get to look our players in the eye. Not the end. Oh, which, by the way, means we should look them in the eye the rest of the time. One thing, Pablo asked me to concentrate on the things that worked and things that don't work. The thing that works incredibly well in your game, if nothing else, is to do testing. And don't test at the end. Test at the beginning and in the middle and almost at the end and at the end and after the end. The more you test, the better your game is going to be. But in particular, test the designs while they're really, really crude. Test your assumptions about how people are going to react. When you can look them in the eye, when you can watch them actually play, or you can build instrumentation to the game to catch how they play, or statistical analysis. But these are really, really important. So back to this. In this model, we're saying, okay, they failed, and the follow-up mentor didn't help them. They didn't shoot off into success and understanding. So we're going to build a really simple, slow method to climb up. And sometimes you can do that. But I think the main problem is that we're thinking about different kinds of people. And we're blaming the people. We're saying, oh, you're not a master, you don't have the mastery response, you're a loser. That's an awful thing for us, and we did this for years. It was awful to do that. It was awful not to say, we're the problem. We're not making a game that works for that person, for everyone. So instead of trying to filter the people or, try to get better players, what we should be doing is to have a better game. And what we should do is figure out what parts of the game create more mastery response and which parts of the game create learned helplessness, and leave those out and just do the mastery response. And so I did some original research, but a lot of studying, of psychologists, not of game people, but learning scientists. And one of them, she had this, she called her insight constructive failure. So I'm using that term, which is failure from which you will learn, right? Failure that helps you, failure that leaves you a better person. And different people found different things important. In the case of, well, here's what I found interesting is like, sorry, I tried to divide it into the problem and the player's response. What kind of response do we want to get to the player? How are we going to build the problem? If they could choose, if they were convinced that the problem was based on how much they learned, then that was good. If they felt like they were it was on how well they could perform, then that led to learned helplessness. So you were if you felt you were being judged by your learning, of course you can learn. But if you're being judged by how well you do, I can't dance, I can't, I can't sing. So those are things I feel are part of me. But if it was, can I learn a little bit? Yeah, I can always learn. If I feel like if the reason I won, that I succeeded, was because I had good strategy, that was great. It was because of ability or effort, not so great. But if I could think it through, and my ability, I feel like I can't change, and my effort, I feel like I'm always giving my best, but my strategy, I always feel like I can improve that. Whoops. Sorry, touchy screen. And how hard should it be? Well, if it's too easy, people don't learn from it, obviously. If it's too hard, again, they don't learn. If they feel like luck is involved, they don't learn, of course. If they get to choose how hard it is, then they want it harder. If they can make it harder, if we're making it harder, they don't want it that hard. They don't want it easy, but they want it in the middle. If they feel in any way that it's rigged, that it's luck or some previous knowledge that's outside the game, they're not going to learn from the game. If they feel it's skill, that's good. If they feel it's a skill that's relevant to them, it's really good. If they feel if it's something that relates to what they want to learn. For example, I've seen a lot of games that teach math by shooting guns, for example. And I see this in different forms all over the place. I'm going to make a game for kids. Kids love games. And they shoot a gun and they run out of bullets. And if they do a math problem, they get more bullets and they can keep shooting the gun. Well, that's stupid because the skill involved is aiming and timing. And those are fun things to do, and they have nothing to do with math. The math is presented as a chore. That's not going to, it's just a terrible way to teach. A game that sets a game challenge that's different from the learning challenge is a game that's not going to be enjoyable and not going to be a teaching game. But also, let's look at how the game makes people feel. And these were studies that were done not in games, but like, in classrooms. If people were afraid, especially adults, if they were afraid of doing poorly, they didn't learn. If when they failed, they felt guilt, that was good. If they felt guilty for failing, they would work to not feel that again. If they felt shame, it was different. If it was shame, they wanted to avoid it. They didn't want to go back and learn. And that was with adults. With middle school, same thing. Although the middle school study also pulled out anger. It found if you made kids angry, they would learn better. I don't know that you want to have angry kids. I kind of think it's not a great idea, but you see in a lot of conspiracy thinking that people try to get their listeners angry so that they'll adopt the mindset that they're, because anger has that unfortunate quality. Anger always makes you feel like you're right, no matter where you are. Again, if they felt like they worked for it, they would learn. If they felt like they had the ability already, or that if it tested their abilities, they're not going to learn. They don't feel like they can change those abilities. If they get to choose, people learned when they chose harder problems after. And then there's some citations where all these studies came from. They're all over the world, all different kinds of populations. So I tried to make from this a set of rules that we could use to make our games better. And here they are. Emphasize the real world relevance. So, and this is really actually more tricky than it sounds. If we're making a game, this game that we made for the CIA, it wasn't just the CIA, it was the intelligence community, as they call it. The people we're making this for are not spies. They don't have, they don't fly around the world in tuxedos, blowing up buildings and doing parkour on top of skyscrapers and drinking martinis with beautiful women and flying airplanes, the one hand, nothing like that. They sit in an office in a cubicle and look at a computer screen all day long and try and figure out what's going on someplace else. Those are the analysts, not the agents, not the intelligence gatherers. And those are the people we're addressing. But to make it feel relevant, we let them be spies in the game. We made the whole game about spying in a sort of a comical way. And comical is important. Well, actually, I'll get back to that one in a second, but this is an even clearer example. We were hired by Boeing, an airplane manufacturer, because their engineers kept making the same mistake over and over. Every time they made a mistake, this line would have to shut down. And when this line shuts down even once, that's $80,000, for a second, as soon as it happens. And it happened all the time. And so making a game was definitely worth it. If we could, because always they try everything else first. And they had tried everything else. They brought in coaches. They had, like cartoons about how this mistake and how to avoid it. And classes after classes. But the problem is nobody would ever make the mistake in class. But they would make the mistake in real life because it's easy to make. And if you were thinking about something else, you would do that. If you were thinking about it, you'd never make that mistake. So we studied the mistake, but then we said, how are we going to teach them? Where's the game going to be set? And so we made it a game about engineering flying vehicles. But if the flying vehicles were airplanes that were anything like these airplanes, those engineers would have thought only about the mistakes that we made in aeronautic engineering. And undoubtedly, the better we made it, the more fidelity we put into the problem, the more they would see the errors, like the uncanny valley. A cartoon doesn't bother you, but a computer model that's almost human is very disturbing. The same thing. So when we think about fidelity, we don't want to make fidelity to those planes. We want to make fidelity to the problem that they keep, the mistake that they keep making. We want that to be absolutely right. But the setting has to be different. So they're not thinking about it. That we turn their job into a cartoon of their job. But the problem is right there all the time. So we created all these different flying vehicles on Mars. So you're up in Mars trying to engineer planes, but the planes are the characters in Mars are pretty bizarre and fun and funny, but the problem is still just as hard. Well, just as easy. It's just as easy to make the problem, create that problem. So by the end of it, hopefully you've learned not to. And the same thing with the intelligence agents. You know, we started off kind of serious, except that this red cloud represented the mental problem that the analysts are having. It's called the cognitive bias. And we created, a cartoon version of spies, but ones where we could take the thing that was bothering them, which was a subtle psychological point of view, and make it visible and make it playable and make it funny. So that's our real world relevance. Next thing would be to elicit guilt and anger, but avoid shame and embarrassment. So, for example, what we do want to do is, because you're being neglectful, a character you really like gets killed. So there's a guilt, a simple way to put guilt into the way we used to run our games. Oh my God, we did exactly the wrong thing for years and years. We would have these leaderboards, and we'd say, we're going to encourage people to do well because they'll be able to beat their pals. Well, that's great for Barb, but look at me, I'm down at the bottom. And I usually am, and I don't want to play this game, and I certainly don't want other people to see it. Or we would go even further. We would have teams. So not only did I put myself in last, but I got my whole team to go into third place because I did so poorly. That's not a good way to teach people. Yeah, the next one is the emotional risk. Oh no, we actually did that. We had some research money, and we used it to do a small. Well, we invented some research money to do a little study to see if it really mattered. We made a bad game in Twine. It was just a simple game, but it was bad in that it wasn't super fun, and so people would quit, which is what we wanted them to do. And we wanted to see how many people would make it to the end if we made them guilty, and how many people would play the same game and make it to the end if we made them angry, and how many people would, well, these are the quitters. How many would quit if they were embarrassed, and how many would quit if they were ashamed? And these are numbers that we kind of expected. It was a small study, so it's not real science, but it was pretty much corroborated what the people who did real science had said. a really important thing and kind of an easy thing to keep in mind is this idea of the moment of failure. The moment of failure can be a moment where you're judged. That's this red one down here. I'm opening the door and there's an assassin on the other side and I get killed or I lose 500 points. I'm judged. That sucks. I'm about to open that door and my mentor, my little projecting genie, says, whoa, wait a second, and stops me from opening the door. Or I open the door, I get shot, I can do it again. But it's not a moment where I'm being judged, it's a moment where I'm learning explicitly in the game. What's this one? Yeah, so we teach kids to brush their teeth, as I said. When they screw up, it's not, we don't make them feel bad. We make them feel they'll do better the next time. It's really important. And now, here's an example of attribution of the why I succeeded or why I failed. If I think I failed, if the mentor says, oh, this is easy for other people, so there's something wrong for me because it wasn't easy for me, that I shouldn't be telling me that. If it's saying, it doesn't matter, it wasn't your fault, well, that's not good either. I want it to be my fault, but I want to be able to learn how to make it not my fault. I don't want to play a game where things just happen because of outside purposes, outside reasons. That's not a game. It's got to be my fault. But it can't be because of the way I am. It's got to be because of what I currently know. And you got to show me how to know more. So here's an example where, she's telling him to mitigate the anchoring. That's the particular problem. Keep trying, you'll get it. Keep up the effort. Here's how to do it. Here's the secret technique. And there's a little bit more, fail about 50% of the time. The only way to do that is to build the game and, build little bits of the game. It doesn't have to look good, and see how hard it is. People failing about the right amount. And then when they fail, give them a choice to try again, but make it harder. Well, they will, obviously, don't make it so hard they can't do it. But offer them a hard choice. Or maybe for example, if they fail and you let them fail, and then you make them do it again and it's harder, that's not great. But if they come through this kind of a process, I'm about to fail, but you stop me and explain why, encourage me to keep trying, and then I get through this, but I haven't, you gave me the answer, so I didn't really win it. The next one should be a little harder. And then I'll probably be able to do it by myself. And I just have a video. I don't even know why I'm going to show this video. Maybe I won't. Sorry. Control tab. I just like this video. I think that's the only reason. Here we try to put it all together. We want them to hear stuff and get a good attitude, learn from the music.
Oh, boo-hoo. I've invented some devices that can unscrew you.
We're gonna
Don't give me all that
hopefully make them laugh.
Give me all that hate. Life can be so simple if you just think straight. My plans are all resisted because the folks to whom I tell them get the facts all twisted inside their cerebellum. My methods have been barred. My machines have been turned off. The world is so darn hard because brains are so darn soft. Your life is in a crisis? Oh, boo-hoo. I've invented some devices that will unscrew you. Don't give me all that trouble. Don't give me all that hate. Life can be so simple if you just think straight.
Okay, thanks, people.
Okay. Thank you, Dov. It was a great talk. I'm pretty sure we could keep on talking a little bit longer, but time is difficult for some of our students.
Yes.
So I wonder if any of you have some questions. If you want to make the questions, si quieren hacer las preguntas en español o por el chat, nosotros las leemos en inglés. I was just saying if somebody wants to make a question, they can do it.
I can sort of understand it spoken, but I can't.
Andrea, cuéntanos.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation, Dov. It was super interesting. And something that you highlighted was how, especially in the beginning, the intelligence community had an interest in game development. Now, I have noticed an interest from the medical community in virtual reality, and I was wondering if there were any industries that you think in the future will either be interested or will fund more in virtual reality game development.
Oh yeah. Virtual reality is very valuable to anything where it's dangerous or expensive or just out of scale. For example, learning to repair an elevator. Right, you can't do that in a classroom. It's just elevator shafts are really big, or operate a forklift. Like forklift safety is it's people are already jumping on that, but it's that kind of a problem. Industrial activities that can be, especially something like forklift safety. There are hundreds of thousands of people driving forklifts, so it's worth making a game. For an industrial process that's only a few people learning it, only a company like Boeing is going to spend the money on a game. But yeah, for virtual reality, I am not a super gigantic fan of virtual reality with people in it. So realistic, sort of realistic metaverse people, but big machines and things like that, or human, taking apart a human, things you can't do in real life. There's an obvious win for it.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Doc, for your answer. One more question. I have several here, but
I can't hear anything.
you cannot hear me? Can you hear
No,
me?
I can.
Oh, good. What I was saying is, I wonder if you can give us some examples of these small tests that you mentioned at the beginning of a game in order to know if a person is really to learn or if he is doomed to lose in some way.
Yes. I can't give any visuals, but it's probably better. One thing that we use a lot is Mechanical Turk. Are you familiar with Mechanical Turk?
Yes.
Your students are? Should I explain?
Maybe you could explain, but because not all of them know it.
Mechanical Turk is like Uber for people that don't have cars, but they want to just sit at their computer and make money doing whatever, anything you can do on a screen. And typically that's like, classifying pictures, like that's a picture of, for machine learning, for example, or more commonly finding pornography in things that people are uploading, or anything that a human being can do on a screen. These people will do for relatively little money and right away, because there's hundreds of thousands all around the world. So you create a task and you put it in their system, and you have a way of tracking what people are doing, and they get paid a small amount of money for doing each one of them. And it's good for testing user interfaces, but it's also good for testing problems. I'm creating a problem. I'll make a small, JavaScript example of it or something. And by the way, for I really like Twine for making little fast tests. So I can make a little Twine thing in a couple, half an hour, 2 hours that presents my problem. Then I can put it in front of real people and see if they get it right, if they enjoy it. I can't look them in the eye, but looking people in the eye is very expensive. You can do it with a few friends until they get tired of doing it with you. And, in school it's a little easier, but in, you need to get out in front of strangers and sometimes we have money to do that. And that's great. And we have a big project, we try to make sure there's money to do that. But in the beginning, we usually go with this anonymous Mechanical Turk.
Great. Good idea. Thank you very much. Any other question?
But when it's kids, when we're doing a game for kids,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I just realized. But with
Yeah.
kids, that's when you need to get like in your Facebook friends and stuff and start paying your friends' kids to play your game. Yeah, because there's no kids on Mechanical Turk.
Good. Any other question? Well, it seems not, but I'm pretty sure there are more questions, although the main problem right now is that some of our students are going to classes.
Oh yeah,
so
sorry.
I would love to thank you again. Thank you, Dov, for your talk. It was really great. I hope we can meet in person in the near future, and hopefully we can start having you either in person or virtually more here in Colombia.
I would love that. I would very much love that.
Thank you, Dov.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
Okay.
everyone. And thanks for coming.
Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Have fun.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.